Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my regular video series in which I highlight an older board game that is a gem. And if you're into the hobby, into the board game hobby, and you're not playing this, you maybe are missing out on something. Some of these old games are still great, and some of them get new additions, like this one we're talking about this week. And the game is Mexica, or now I'm going to do my best, Mexica, which would have been the pronunciation for the Nahuatl people. This is the name of the people who basically founded Mexico. This is the name of the people of the Aztec Empire who founded the city of Tenochtitlan, which is the focus of this game and is where Mexico City is now. But in a lot of countries, it's pronounced Mexica, and I'll try to stick to Mexica, but I'm worried I'll lapse into old habits, so please forgive me. It was designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, and was published originally by Ravensburger. In this edition, this is part of what was called the Mask Trilogy, which came out in the late 1990s, early 2000s. They all had a mask on the cover, as you can see. This is the third in the series, after the first being Tikal, which won Game of the Year. And then there was Java, which had a more recent edition renamed Cuzco. So now they all have like a pre-Columbian civilization setting. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, and takes about 90 minutes to play. This is the 2002 edition, and a few years ago, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe 2016, 2015, something like that, publisher Super Meeple, who you might be familiar with from my video on Mississippi Queen. They did a reprint of that. And they've been going through a lot of reprints of old games, like Amun-Re, for example, and they've done one for Mexica. The Super Meeple edition says it takes 60 to 90 minutes. If you're playing a 2, maybe 3-player game and you're kind of rushing through it, I could see 60 minutes as a possibility. It can be very possible or even likely that games of this can run long, because it's also known as besides the Mask Trilogy, it's known as the AP Trilogy. Now, AP can stand for action points, which are every turn you'll have a certain number of points you use to do actions, and each action might cost a different number of points. But AP in the hobby can also stand for analysis paralysis, the idea of when you have too many options, too many choices, and it freezes you up because you don't know how to proceed. Which AP? Yes. It's an action point game, and it can suffer a little bit from analysis paralysis. However, of the trilogy, now keep in mind I haven't played Java or Cusco, but compared to Tikal and this one, I think this suffers less from AP. I'll get into it after I teach you how to play, and then afterwards we'll go over why it's still a gem today. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players, preferably face up. You're going to empty out all the bridges, and these are district tokens, and place them somewhere near the board, or if you can fit them, just in one corner of the board. So these are the district tokens. You're going to take all of them, mix them up face down, and place 8 face up in the corner here. These are the bridges. These are action point tokens. In this edition, there's 3 different action point tokens. They're all the same. They're just different art on them. The remaining 7 of these district tokens just place off the side of the board. They'll come into play in the second half of the game. And you're going to take out these canals, these canal tiles. There's a couple that are just 1 tile large, but most of them are 2. And you're going to place 2 kind of to start right here on this part here that's pre-printed the canal. And the rest, again, just try to have them off to the side or somewhere. Each player gets all the pieces of 1 color, which includes a pawn, a scoring cube, which you'll place on the 0 of the score track, and all the temples of 1 color. And they actually will show 1, 2, 3, and 4 dots on the top in case the height is not obvious enough. And each player also gets a player aid. On one side, it will show how many of each size temple each player starts with for the first half of the game. So you can see 1 4 temple, 2 3s, 3 2s, and 3 1s. And any remaining temples are set aside and will come into play in the second half of the game. Finally, determine a start player. The rules say the oldest goes first. If you're playing with friends, then the player who's most experienced with the game can go first. And that player is going to take their pawn and place it on one of the 4 starting spaces. That's these kind of 4, not the middle space, but these 4 around. So they're going to pick one, and then all the players do so. So the goal of the game is to get the most points over 2 rounds. You get points in 2 ways, basically, 2 main ways. If you're able to kind of partition a land area of a particular size that's completely surrounded by water, so you'll see this land area is size 5. And if you are in there, and there's a district token of that same numbers, in this case 5, you may take the matching token, place it on one of the empty spaces there, and you've created that district. And you will immediately score the middle number. So you can see there's 3 numbers. There's the big number, and then the second number is half rounded up, and the third number is half of that rounded up. So that middle number is how many points you get if you create a district. And you score those points immediately. But halfway through the game, and again at the end of the game, players will be scoring points for having the most influence in a particular region. Each floor of a temple grants 1 influence. So if it looked like this at the end of the half of the game, then the player who has the most floors, in this case red, would score the largest number, 5. The player who has the second most gets the second biggest number. And if there's a third player, then they would get the smallest number. And any districts that are formed at the first half of the game will score at the end of the first half, but will score again at the end of the second half. So again, play starts with the oldest player, or the player who's most familiar with the game. And each player has a number of action points. And that's on the other side of the player aid. This shows how many action points, in this case 6. Each player has 6 action points to spend during their turn. And these are all the different actions you can do. Might look a little intimidating, it's really not, it's really straightforward. To place a canal, either a 1 size or a 2 size, costs 1 action. You take a canal tile of either size and place it anywhere on the board that you want. It can't overlap other canals, it can't overlap the lake, but you can cover any 1 or 2 spaces with a canal. You don't have to be anywhere near it, just anywhere on the island. You can build a canal for 1 action. For 1 action, you can build a bridge, and again, you can be anywhere on the island and build a bridge on top of a canal. The way that works is you place the bridge, and there has to be land on both ends of the bridge. So you couldn't do this, for example, but you could do that because there's land here and land there. And it actually doesn't matter if the land is blocked. That's completely fine, just as long as it's a land space on both sides. What that does mean is that you can no longer place a canal here because there would no longer be a land space. And if there was already a canal there, you would not be able to place a bridge there. And then there's movement. For 1 action, you can move a pawn 1 space. North, south, east, or west. If there's a bridge, then for 1 action point, you can get on the bridge. And for 1 action point, you can get off the bridge. You have to approach it from the ends. So again, if the bridge looked like this and your pawn was here, you couldn't get on the bridge like that. You'd have to walk around it. Now, one interesting thing is that there is what's called bridge-to-bridge movement. If it looks something like this, once you are on a bridge, you can spend 1 action point to move to any other bridge that is connected to it via water. So in this case, this pawn would take a canoe, sail down this canal out into the lake, go all the way around, and then over here for 1 action point. But let's say they want to go to a different bridge, that bridge. The first action point would be to get to this one, and then they need another action point to sail to the next one. If there's a player on the bridge, they still sail under the bridge to go to the next one, but they still spend the action. So it's still 2 action points. And they cannot get off on this bridge, but they will go under that bridge to the next one. It's still 2 action points. So it's a way you can travel around the island very fast. An even faster way is you can just spend 5 action points and just jump to any land space on the island you want to. And then of course you can build temples. Now, you always have to build temples in the district you are in. Now right now, this is all 1 district. So if the pawn was in here, they could found this district. It is of size 13. 3, 7, 10, 13. In order to found the district, they have to be in it. And it's a free action. So they would take the matching token, 13, not any other one, has to be the exact same size, place it on any empty land space, and they would immediately score the number of points for the middle number, in this case 7 points. Now in order to build a temple in a district, you have to be in the district. So red could build temples in here. But this is all 1 big district. So even though the pawn is here, if he wanted to, he could build a temple down here. It's all 1 big district right now. But to build in a district, you have to be in that district. And its number of action points equal to the number of floors. So to build this one would cost 2 action points. And to build 2 of these would cost 2 action points. The other thing you can do with action points is you can buy action point chips. It's a way to save actions for the next round. You can buy up to 2 on your turn. So you always want to spend at least 4 actions, but if you have 1 or 2 left over and you're not sure what to do, you can buy some action chips. You buy them, you keep them in your supply. You can only buy at most 2 in a turn, but you can continue to buy them every turn. And on a later turn, you can spend them for free to gain additional actions. So you're basically saving your actions for a later turn. So the game is split into 2 halves, and the first half ends when all 8 of these districts are formed. So all 8 of these tokens are on the board, and at least 1 player has placed all their temples. You still finish the round, so the same number of turns for each player, and then for every district you score. You look in the district and you count the number of floors that each player has in that district. And the player who has the most floors gets the biggest number, the player who has the second most gets the middle number, and the player who has the third most gets the smallest number. Ties are friendly, so in a case that first and second are tied, they would both get the 13. Third place would still get the smallest number, the 4. When the half ends and you're scoring, if a pawn is on one of the 4 starting spaces, that player will get a bonus 5 points. So you score those points, move the score markers appropriately. All the temples stay where they are. And then you get the remaining 7 districts and place them on this. Each player gets more temples, and any players that had temples left over from the first half of the game will keep the remainder and be able to play them in the second half of the game. And again, the game will end, the second half will end, when all the district tokens are on the board, in this case all 15, 8 from the first half and 7 from the second half, and 1 player has played all their temples. And again, you finish the round, and then you score. You score exactly the same way. Any districts that were scored in the first half will be scored again in the second half. Again, a player who ended up with their pawn on one of the 4 starting spaces will gain a bonus 5 points. And in addition, there's one extra bit of scoring. You see, the island will not be perfectly divided. There will be some areas of the island that are not part of any district. At the end of the game, they still score as if they were districts. So if players have temples in them, you would count the number of spaces in that region, and that's how many points first place would get. Second place would get half that rounded up. Third place will get half that rounded up. So if that's one big area, that can be potentially a large number of points at the end of the game. And that's it. The player with the most points at the end of the second half wins the game. You're ready to play Mexica, or Mexica. So Mexica is a action points game. All the games in the trilogy are action point games. Tikal, Java, now Cusco, and Mexica, as well as their not-so-distant cousin, Torres, which was actually released kind of in the middle of that trilogy and is also an action point game, and it also won Spiel des Jahres along with Tikal. I haven't played all the games in the trilogy. I have not played Java/Cusco. I will say that compared to Torres and my memory of Tikal, Mexica is the most straightforward, the simplest, the most family-friendly. I don't mean that as a negative, all right? The thing is that you don't want a game to be too abstruse, right? That's a word, it's a real word, look it up. Just meaning something is really hard to learn, like it's not intuitive. There's like a barrier to entry in terms of learning it. And I will say that Mexica is a very intuitive game. The action points and the actions that the points map to are all really straightforward, right? To move a step, it's a point. To build a tower, it's 1 point per level. There are weird things like bridges that you can move, and you can sail a canoe basically from one bridge to another via the water and even all the way around the lake just for one action. And people would think, like, oh, that doesn't make a lot of sense. First of all, it's thematic, okay? The city of Tenochtitlan apparently had a lot of canals, and they did have bridges that they could move from canal to canal if they wanted to. So surprisingly, because, you know, German designers, German publishers, they're not necessarily known for picking a theme and setting and really nailing it, but I actually feel like they nailed it here. So that's really great. The fact that you can do these massive plays where you move from one bridge to another and just travel basically all the way around the lake to a completely different place for one action, you have to have that, because you need the ability to have dynamic plays, right? If you're limited in what you can do, if you just have the, one step per action, then you're on one side of the board. It's going to be hard to do anything on the other side of the board. But if you can make these big moves relatively easily, then it's more dynamic and it's more opportunistic, right? So it's a little bit more friendly. I say family friendly. Maybe that's not the best way to describe it. I just mean approachable for anybody to learn. Like some of the great gamers games back in those days were actually very, very likely or possible that a person who wouldn't normally consider themselves a gamer but played what we would have called gateway games and enjoyed them, this is not much of a step up from that. That's reflected in the age range, of course, because stuff like Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne is ages 8 and up, and this, at least the Ravensburger edition, is 10 and up. This one says 14 and up, but don't pay any attention to that. At some point in the past, the United States introduced some rules basically on imported games, such that if they were toys, then they would have to go through expensive testing just to make sure that if a kid sucks on a piece that they don't get poisoned. And games can often be categorized as toys, and so the fear was that if you label something ages 8 and up or 10 and up, then you could argue, oh, it's for kids, so it needs this testing. So at some point, a lot of the publishers releasing in the English language market, so including the United States, would basically just say, oh, it's 13 up, 14 up. And now it's useless, basically. So anyway, a little bit of an aside there. This is a 10 and up game. And I mean, now this is important, right? Because gamers, these are the best games, right? Games that are simple to learn, such that anybody who has even a little bit of a familiarity with these games of ours, Tigu, even if they're just playing Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne and Transamerica and Cartagena and all the light stuff, if they want to learn Mexica, they totally can. It's not hard to learn. And 4 people who have never played the game before can learn it and enjoy it with each other. But you get 4 hobbyists playing it, oh, then you're butting heads, right? It's a real challenge. The game itself has just a random setup. And the only random setup is the octagonal tokens, the district tokens, that you place in the districts to found them when they're a certain size. So you add these tokens, there's 15 of them, you split them up and use 8 in the first half and the other 7 in the second half. And those are the sizes of districts that people have to create, and that's enough randomness. That's all you need. It's a really nice design achievement. Not that necessarily players care so much, but it's the type of thing that another designer will look at that designer and go, I see what you did there. Really great. Just a randomized setup, the barest minimum of randomized setup. And from that, it's all the players interacting. But still, the games can develop very, very differently. This game will never be accused of being multiplayer solitaire. All right? It's an area majority, so in the districts, you're obviously trying to found the districts, but also you're trying to get your temples, build those temples in there, and have more levels than your opponents. And it's all area majority, right? Whoever has the most gets the most points. Whoever has the second most gets the second most points. So there's a lot of interactivity that way, but also a lot of blocking. And that's really fun. Instead of building 1 3-floor temple, you could build 3 1-floor temples. And it's the same number of action points, but you're filling up the spaces, right? And it makes it harder for other players to kind of get in there, or they have to commit to building a single larger one. You can even block with your pawns. You can block with the temples, you can block with those district tokens, because you can't walk through them. But it never feels like take that. Well, except for one case. You see, at the end of the game, it's possible that, and likely, in fact, that you're not going to, the whole island by the end of the game is not going to be perfectly partitioned into districts. There's going to be some area or areas that are not claimed, they're not divided, right? And in the end, at the end of the game, at the end of the second round, you divvy up points in that area, for the temples in that unclaimed area, just as if it was a district. And sometimes there are small districts, and sometimes there's one big massive one. And a person who's watching closely can see the canals, right? There's a limited number of canals, and as they get used up, if they seem to be getting used up pretty fast, then you can think at the end of the game like, oh, there's going to be one massive area left because there's not going to be enough canals to divide it up. So it's going to be one massive area, which is going to be worth a massive number of points, and then players should ideally rush to build their temples in there. And that was the case with one game I played where we were identifying that there was one area that's going to be big, and it was going to be it's going to be worth a lot of points, and I'm building temples there, but I didn't think it through. And my wife built canals, because there's still some canals left, just not enough to divide it up properly. But there were enough canals left that she was able to section off my temples into a tiny little district. And I had this 4-floor temple, and it ended up scoring 2 points for it or something. As opposed to what could have been, a massive number. So there's a little bit of take that there. But come on, that's fun, right? That is so fun. And I laughed when she did that to me. It's like, she gets it. She can see how this game plays, right? And it has the opportunity for plays like that. That's what you want. It's what you want in a game like this. You want a lot of interactivity and preferably a lot of table talk. It's like, oh, stay out of that district. That's my district. Stay out. No. You want players to not be surprised. And so sometimes you want to give them a heads up about certain things. I would say in Mexica, you definitely want to give a heads up about the fact that by the end of the game, there might be one giant district left over. And it can be very, very important to get temples in there. That could be a bit of a surprise if players recognize it. Some players recognize it and other players don't. Then those players could get this massive score, and it can feel a little bit unfair to people. So I don't know, just give them the heads up in advance. Ideally, players will be competing for whatever spaces are left over. And because those spaces, those unclaimed districts can be huge, it ends up being like a little bit of endgame scoring, right? You want that opportunity for a player to come back if they're falling behind. You want kind of endgame scoring, right? Well, at the end, this player gets a bonus and their score shoots way up. So even if somebody's falling behind, they can aim for those bonuses. One thing that's really important that Mexica does, so this is the last game of the trilogy, right? And I would suggest it's the most developed. And it does something which I don't think the other games in the trilogy do, and Torres doesn't do. It allows you to bank action points. This is very important to make the game approachable. What happens is if you have a game like Tikal has something like 10 action points on your turn. So for one thing, that's kind of paralyzing, right? It's like, oh my God, this costs 5 action points, this costs 2. And, the turns can feel long because you're trying to figure out how to spend your action points. And you kind of have to spend them all. I mean, if you don't, the rest are wasted, right? At least that's my memory of Tikal. If I'm wrong, I apologize. That can really add to the analysis paralysis because you want to maximize your turn. You want to analyze it and go, I don't want to waste any actions. So what can I do? What should I do? And plan it out as best you can. In Mexica, you don't have to worry about that because you can bank actions. You start with, I think, 6. You get 6 actions on your turn, and you can bank up to 2. So you'll do at least 4, and then you bank. You can bank 1 or 2, or of course none, so that you can have a bigger turn later. Even though you can only bank at most 2 actions and save them for a later turn, you can do that every turn. So you can gradually bank action point tokens and bank them, a big number of them, for a massive turn later, right? Now, action points, to save them means you don't have to worry too much about it, right? Okay, well, I know I want to do this, and I have 2 actions left. I'm not sure what to do. Instead of spending a minute or two trying to figure out how to not waste actions, I'll just bank them. I don't have to worry about it. I'll just bank them for now, and next turn I'll have more options later. So it really helps the game go smoothly. Those action point tokens are limited. In my plays, generally people have spent them as they got them, and we never really ran out, but it is definitely possible to run out. And it's possible to hoard action point tokens and keep other people from getting them. If the action points run out, the tokens, because one player is consistently turn after turn not using all their actions and they're just banking, they can bank a ton of tokens and then there aren't enough left for other players. The game does say the oldest player goes first. That's code for it is disadvantageous to go first. And whenever you see oldest player goes first, have the player who's most familiar with the game start. They say that because they're imagining the game being played in a family setting with parents and kids. And if they say the youngest goes first, that gives the kids a little bit of an advantage. And if the oldest goes first, that gives the parents a little bit of a penalty. And of course you could balance that out, but it's not that big a deal, right? Sometimes they add rules in a game to balance it out, right? Like I remember when we did on the Underground, that video. The original version, just everybody had the same number of actions, but in the new version of On the Underground, they said, okay, the start player does, I think, 3 actions, and the last player does 5, and everybody else does 4, or something like that. And when it's easy to do, that's preferred, that's ideal. But it is one extra rule. I don't really consider it that big a deal, but just take those to heart. When it says oldest or youngest go first, know that there is a built-in advantage or disadvantage and take that into account. I could totally see it's most advantageous for the last player because the start player never changes throughout the game. And so the last player will always have that opportunity when the round ends to have that sort of final influence, the final changing of the board game state before scoring, and that's an advantage. But it's balanced a little bit by the starting players being able to get first crack at the action point tokens, I think. So it's not really a problem for me. At the beginning of the game, it can feel a little bit directionless because you're given just this giant island, and there's a couple of canals that start on the board, but otherwise it's there's lots of options. So I can understand people being a little bit paralyzed about how to start and what the first couple turns will be like. So it's another advantage of the more experienced player going first, so they can kind of see what a typical turn is, right? But yeah, at the beginning of the game, it can feel a little bit directionless, like, what do I do? One nice thing about the game is that decision space narrows, right? As the island becomes more and more divided up, you actually have kind of fewer options, right? Some districts will be essentially full and you can't really influence them anymore. Some are almost full, so you can see an opportunity there, right? Try to get in there, and maybe there aren't that many districts left to found. So actually the decision space kind of becomes narrower. That's ideal in my opinion, right? I mean, it's kind of ideal when it's not wide open at the beginning either. That it's not wide open at any point, but I'd rather it be wide open at the beginning. Then as the game goes on and kind of the stakes become higher, then you have kind of fewer options. Otherwise, games can just drag. This is already not a short game, all right? Like I said, the game's intuitive. This is a game that I could pull off the shelf in 5 years, 10 years, and I'll still know how to play. I'll have to look up, well, how many action points do we do? Oh, look, there's a little player aid. Perfect. And I have to look up very little after that. A lot of the rules make sense within the context of the game. And those ones are much easier to internalize. And so this is a game I suspect I will have in my permanent collection until I'm old and gray. That's what I'm looking for in a game. I want a game that you can play with all sorts of different people. You can play with new players. It's not too complicated to learn, but it's deep. And you play this game with experienced players, it can be very sharky. So that's what you want in a game. That's the perfect blend, basically. I'll talk a little bit about the different editions. So the older edition has this big long box. It's really annoying. There is kind of a standard long box shape that Ravensburger uses, and Zweif, 2F Spiele, the Power Grid, for example. There's kind of a standard long box size, and I don't mind that box size. That's pretty standard. The Mask Trilogy are longer and wider boxes. They're really annoying. So it is nice to see the new edition have more of a standard square box shape. The components are great in the old edition. They're plastic, and they're solid color plastic, which was, I think, amazing probably at the time. There wouldn't be much to look at now from people who are just wowed by amazing board art and they want like amazing components that just blow you away, right? No, okay, they're pretty standard plastic components, but they're shaped very nicely, right? I only have one real complaint about the old edition besides the box size, and that is that the bridges and the canals are a rather thin cardboard, which is not atypical for a Ravensburger game. But in particular, the bridges, once you place a canal, that canal is there until the end of the game. But the bridges, you're moving the bridges all around. And especially when there are some temples, some tall temples, it can be a little annoying to try to pick up a bridge and move it. It's not a huge deal, but it's something that definitely could have been improved and was improved here. Because in this edition of Mexica, the bridges are wooden and they're raised, which is a really nice effect because the canoes can go under the bridges. So the actual wooden bridges have a little arch. They kind of go up, so they're easy to pick up, but also visually it makes sense for the canoes to be able to go through them, go under them. So really nice. The pawns in this one are shaped. The pawns have this big headdress. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. In the original, they are just basically cones almost. Rounded cones, which is fine, but both are fine. So the new edition replaced the plastic temples with resin, like a hard resin. and it's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, kind of chalked. So it's not a solid color. It gives it kind of a rough, rocky appearance. Looks amazing. And you set it up on the table. By the end of the game, you'll definitely want to take a picture of it because it's like you built the city. Like, it's really photogenic. The game has, people want table presence, and this game delivers. And table presence was fine in the old game too, but Super Meeple really upped it for this edition. Last thing I'll say is I just want to compare this a little bit with Tikal, which is going to be a little bit tricky for me to do because I've only played Tikal once and it was a long time ago. I do want to play it again sometime. Super Meeple is redoing the entire trilogy, so they've already released Tikal in other languages other than English, and I believe they said that the English edition will be coming in 2021. They probably had to wait for the rights to expire, maybe with Rio Grande. They've already published Cuzco, which is the new edition of Java, rethemed to pre-Columbian. So in each of the games of the trilogy, right, you have a different pre-Columbian civilization, starting with Tikal, which would have been Mayan, and then Cuzco, which would have been Incan, and then Mexica, which would have been Aztec. So a nice thematic connection between all the games. And I'm a collector. I like having a set of games, so I'm very tempted to get all 3 games in this series, but they all have a lot of similarities, such that I'm not sure I need all 3. Mexica is the most approachable because there's fewer action points. The costs are mostly pretty obvious and straightforward. And the fact that you can bank a couple means that you don't have to stress too much about having the perfect turn. Just do a couple of obvious things, and at the end, if you don't know what to do, just bank your actions and you have time before your next turn to think about it. So I'm not sure that I need all 3 games in the trilogy. I'm tempted. I love having a complete set, but if I was to only have one, I would be very, very happy with Mexica, and I expect this to be in my collection for a long, long time. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Mexica don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.